Loading. Okay, now we are live to the third episode of the Thorns and Roses, which technically says it's fourth, but that was a scheduling issue that happened. So, anyway, with us today we have Justin. He is a fellow contributor on the Hill of Roses, and yeah, as you probably noticed, I
Hi.
can get a lot. As you probably noticed, I can get a lot of left-wing support from the Hill of Roses. So anyway, Justin, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, well, thank you, Grayson, for having me on the technically fourth episode of The Thorn and Roses. So my name's Justin, as you can probably see from the name that's like right here, somewhere under the screen. And my Twitter handle is Gen Z Reviewer, and I'm also a fellow Hell of Roses contributor. And today I will be discussing with Grayson about healthcare, was it?
Yeah, healthcare and then maybe other topics depending on how this goes.
Yes, exactly. It should be fairly interesting.
Yeah. Anyway, well, I know from discussion that we both support the German model.
Yes, from discussion, me and Grayson both seem to support the German model of the universal healthcare. So, but I actually don't know much about the German model myself. I know it's where a system where private enterprises, such as nonprofit health insurance company, believe it or not, those do exist, nonprofit private insurance companies compete with each other to provide the healthcare, and they have basically universal coverage in Germany. Is that correct, Grayson?
Yes, how I would describe it is that there is a national health insurance, but it's only for people who who are considered to absolutely need healthcare, and and the government encourages private spending through private, mostly nonprofit, and then even in Germany there are a couple of for-profit insurance companies, but those are less popular for obvious reasons. And the German model also is kind of like the South Korean model, except it's a little. South Korea, though, they will pay 60% of your in health costs, and then the 40% you get through private insurance.
Yeah. Um, so what are the benefits, in your opinion, is do we have with the public-private partnership?
Well, for one, it's a way to artificially lower prices without price control because when you have a competitor offering a lower price product and the supply is infinite, you will lower demand, which will lower costs, and thus provide a free market system that the government is still involved in, but its regulation just doesn't go past beyond actually being a part of it. And
Uh,
another advantage with this whole free market public health insurance is that it's a lot cheaper than like single payer healthcare, which could cost $3 trillion a year.
yeah, I definitely do agree with you on there. It's so bad. Like I'm supposed to be like the left wing like person that's here today, but instead I'm like drifting sort of to the right wing, but it's okay. So I actually think that with single payer healthcare, one of the issues we absolutely do need to solve is the drug price. Because right now,
Yeah,
believe it or not, President Donald Trump, I know this is hard to believe, but Trump
I've
himself,
heard this.
oh,
Yeah.
okay. So Trump himself tried to import cheaper drugs from outside of the United States into the United States to lower the drug price. But Nancy Pelosi said no. The U.S. government is going to deal with local U.S. pharmaceutical big pharma companies to lower the drug price. And she technically did lower the drug price, but the prices are so much higher than
Yeah.
anywhere else in the world, basically.
Yeah,
So,
and oh,
oh,
I'll
go
let you.
ahead.
Do you have something to finish with?
Oh no, go ahead.
Oh, so, yeah, and this is also surprising. And after the 2018 midterm elections, this is like 2019. I think it was Senator Rick Scott and Josh Hawley, of all people, were the ones to propose legislation that would make it so that U.S. drug companies could not sell more than what they do in places like Germany and Spain, mostly
Hmm.
Europe. And this was obviously rejected by like both the Republican and Democrat establishment, even though
Yeah,
Scott himself is a very establishment Republican, but apparently that didn't help the bill at all.
yeah. Actually, you know, we are very anti-establishment, but I know I'm really anti-establishment on Twitter, but sometimes changes actually can come from the establishment candidates, like I think there's a certain good in our politicians. Like, I don't think most of the politicians started out going to Congress like, yes, I'm going to be a corrupt establishment candidate. I think most of them did start off wanting positive changes, but over the course of decades, they slowly got corrupted by the dark pack monies and dark interest, and they slowly become, establishment. But sometimes when you push the buttons enough from their constituents, like their voter base, we can actually pressure them into making the policies we want to implement.
Yeah, like I know, yeah, that's the thing. Every time a candidate has a close election in which they could lose, they're always doing a lot more than they ever did. One example would be Max Rose in New York. I don't know, I think it's like New York 11. He has a challenger who is actually beating him in the polls, and so now he's actually trying to do good things now because if he doesn't, he loses. And another
Yeah,
example would be Tim Ryan before he did because like, I'm pretty sure he only did support for universal basic income solely because there was a potential for a Republican challenger in his district.
yes, I absolutely agree with you. And speaking about that, it wouldn't actually be a stretch if Republican politicians were to propose something like universal health care, because do you want to explain why Republicans might want to push for universal health care?
Yeah, it will promote families. It's a good family method because as of now, a single mother family is more likely to get on Medicaid than a two-parent family due to less income coming into a single parent. But if you expand Medicaid to include two-parent families and most families, this will mean that they don't have to worry about healthcare costs. They can actually focus more on the child. And it will mean that they don't have to worry about having to get divorced just so they can get on Medicaid, which unfortunately does happen. And so the best way for a family first agenda, if that's what the Republicans really want, is to promote a health care plan that makes it so that everyone can have at least a good health insurance option. I mean, and it will also mean you don't have to worry about paying for your child's health care.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. And I think the way to go about this is we have a public option. The government does offer some sort of public health insurance, but then the government needs to encourage private nonprofit healthcare competing nonprofit healthcare insurance companies so that we can allow the free market to do its course and bring down the prices as well. That way, everyone can, have coverage.
And this is, again, with regulations. America has some of the most regulatory things with pharma. And guess who proposed these regulations? Was Big
Big
Pharma.
Pharma.
Yeah.
I,
In
I, and,
Japan, they keep very low prices and there's very little regulations because I think it's like you can get a lot of big prescription drugs for like $5 sometimes there. Like
mhm.
I remember because I had to get medicine because I have all sorts of medical issues and sometimes they can be extremely expensive, like hundreds of dollars. And then sometimes, usually if they're made by a foreign producer, like one drug I had was only $4. It was a prescription drug. Not like $4 per pill either. $4 for for a month supply.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's 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 the definition of insanity. Um, yeah, I really do think that it's actually, I think, with the patent laws too, big pharma under like, the course of patents, like intellectual property rights, they hold on to like these medication and they don't allow other smaller pharmacies to produce the same type of drugs, therefore forming like a monopoly on the market. And that's really that's not really what the free market's about. And I think that these monopoly, big pharma or pseudo monopolies should be broken up. What do you
Yeah.
think?
Yeah, no, I think putting antitrust laws into actions will should be a thing we do with Big Pharma. Another problem with Big Pharma is that government subsidizes you to create drugs and you sell the drugs at impossible to pay prices. You
Yeah,
mean
isn't it?
we'll we pay we as taxpayers, well you as taxpayers, or whoever, people as taxpayers do are giving you this money to create drugs and you're making it impossible to pay for it.
Yeah, how does that make sense? That's moronic. We, as the taxpayers, pay big pharma to create the drugs, which they then sell at ridiculously high prices that we can't even buy.
If we're,
That
su-
is that.
I'm thinking this, if we're subsidizing big pharma, we should also give them more regulations for the subsidy. Like, okay, you want money for a hot pill? Well, you have to sell it at this price because
Mhm.
we are not going to pay you to make a profit.
Yes, I think also there should be an expiration date on those patents as well.
Yes.
After a certain number of years, big pharma absolutely cannot renew said patents that were subsidized because that intellectual property belongs to us, the people, and not some CEO in
Yeah.
like the big pharma's office.
See, I think some people make the mistake of trying to confuse free markets to this crony pharma healthcare we have. Like, if we had a free market healthcare, at least we would have fairly cheaper drugs because competition will almost inevitably lower drugs. Of course, there are also other issues with American healthcare that go beyond just the paying of drugs. Like, we do have a more unhealthy population, generally speaking.
Yeah, and it pains me to you bring up an excellent point. It pains me to say, but we, the US, here, we have a more unhealthy population compared to the rest of the developed world, whether it's Sweden, whether it's France, whether it's Japan, you name it. Like, we are very, very sick. And you remember what Marianne Williamson said in like her very first debate? We don't
Yeah.
have a healthcare system. We have a sick care system. We just wait for someone to get sick and then argue about who pays the bill, you know?
Yeah, that just reminds me of a pretty messed up joke when it's just like, oh yes, I believe in health care, not sick care. It should only care for the healthy. Yeah,
Yeah.
We don't
That
want that
that
either.
Yeah, exactly. But you do bring up like a really interesting point. We need to ask why so many Americans are sick. And it has things to do with our chemical policies. It has things to do with, I'm copy and paste Marianne Williamson's speech here. It has things to do with our chemical policies, our environmental policies, and our basically school policies even, like in school lunches, it's very unhealthy lunch that are being served to our future, our kids. And then plus some chemicals being used that is known to cause neural defects, that's known to cause birth defects. It's not banned in the United States, but it's banned in Japan, even China and the European Union, but it's not banned here in the United States. How crazy is that?
Yeah.
So we definitely need to look at these chemical policies as well to make sure that Americans are ingesting the healthiest food that we can ingest so we don't get sick as often as we do.
Yes, I actually go to an American high school, so I know what the lunches are like. Yeah. And
Come,
the beans are
how,
pretty good.
I see. How does that compare to like lunch at in the Hungarian school? What do
I
you
know.
think?
Well, the specific school I went to, for most people, didn't actually provide lunch because it was a mismanaged school, and so most of the
I
time you
see.
had. I never ate lunch in Hungary because outside of Budapest, most schools have this issue of being very mismanaged.
Oh, I see. Well, that's not a good comparison,
Yeah.
but
No, if we were like Germany or France, like
mhm.
I saw a thing in France where they got like a professional chef who even once
Mhm.
cooked for Queen Elizabeth in a school cafeteria.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah, like when you want that, like, but I'm not saying we should have that level of like that
Yeah,
high
no.
level of cooking,
Yeah.
but
We aren't French. We don't have that
yeah,
many chefs.
yeah, but at least, at the very least, we can improve the nutrition that's being served at our kids' lunch table, and also we talked about the school policies, the chemical policies, and I need to talk about the environmental policies. Our environmental policies are not good as well. We have constant pollutions in the water, oil spills, and just the air in like big cities such as, oh, you're not on the west side, but I'm really close to Los Angeles, and sometimes the air when you breathe it, it's filled with, I don't know, it's filled with toxins, if you know what I'm saying.
I actually get that because there's a paper plant that's in our town and it has a lot of bad emissions.
Yeah.
Another thing with America that we tend not to want to talk about is that I'll tell you this, drive-throughs for fast food restaurants are not as common in Europe and I think that's another issue that's adding to this obesity crisis because, I mean, yeah, we obviously have McDonald's all over Europe, but A, they're not widespread, and B, they almost never have a drive-through. I mean, the only McDonald's I can think that even technically qualifies as a drive-through is that there's a McDonald's that's in a train station. That's
Hmm.
technically a drive-through McDonald's, but other than that,
Yeah,
there
but
isn't.
that's like stretching it though. That's like super stretching it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I mean, you drive through, you can go order it on the train, but like other than that,
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. Actually, you bring up a really good point with the train station and the drive-throughs, and it ties actually very nicely to my environmental policies that I want to discuss. So, Americans love cars, right? We
yeah.
absolutely love cars. We basically spend, was it, I forgot, a fourth or a third of our life just on cars, if I remember correctly, according to, it was I think it was a Princeton research or it was Stanford research, I forgot, but we basically spend our most of our not most of our life, but a large chunk of our life on cars. And part of the reason why is because our public transportation sucks compared to any other European country or even developing country such as Eastern Europe and China because they have high-speed railroads. Their public transportation doesn't suck as our public transportation sucks. And what's funny is most of us can actually use if our public transportation systems are not bad, we can use public transport to go places instead of relying on our car and emitting all these, fuels into the atmosphere and toxic greenhouse gas. And it does way more than actually what the Green New Deal does, to lower carbon emission.
because transportation is now the leading CO2 emission. And this
Yeah,
also brings up a pretty ironic point because back in the 1800s, America had the best public transportation system of any country. You had the
yeah.
streetcars, you had the biggest, you had the first transcontinental railroad, but then suddenly the automobile became popular because it was invented in America and was widespread first here. And so I think ever since then, transportation is just not as easy to come by here. I mean, and the thing with public transportation, it doesn't always has to be controlled by the government. Japan has, I think, has a completely privatized transit system,
Mhm.
but due to again free markets, it's technically very cheap.
Yes, I like right now, the automobile companies spend billions, like tens of billions of dollars each year to lobby like Congress to pass regulations against public transportation, and they have infiltrated the cities and they squeeze money out of public transports and then they turn around and advertise how public transport sucks, but they're the one who's causing it. And I think that needs to end. And we need to basically make our public transport great again because Americans had the best public transportation back in the 1800s, like you said, with the train. It's a traditional American thing, like the conservatives should absolutely be on board with this. And um, I actually read a study a while ago, but you can fact check me on this. But they say that the single most determinant cause for wealth, for like your income, is not education, it's not your zip code, it's access to transportation. If you have sufficient access to transportation, you're more likely to become wealthy and get out of poverty than anything else, even more so than education.
I
So,
haven't. That sounds in. Yeah,
mhm,
again, for public transportation, I know sometimes some of the countries that have public transportation, it's like Hungary has excellent public transportation, but it was also built by a Soviets who wanted us to use public
mhm.
transportation and never really consulted us about it. It was just sort of like,
Yeah,
but we got used to it. This
yeah,
is another ironic thing. Countries with the best infrastructures have usually been bombed in the last 100 years. It's like it's like Dresden. It's a very nice city. Wasn't so nice in 1945.
yeah. The only country that I can think of that breaks this rule is Switzerland. They have awesome cities, but they have never been bombed recently, not to
It
the
was
best of my knowledge.
That's because they have all the money from banking. Yeah, yeah.
Why do you think they have all the money from the banking?
Because they 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 stole it from the Nazis.
They stole it from the Nazis. Really?
well, not really. They were harboring Nazi code, and then when the Nazis were
Um,
defeated, they just sort of kept it.
I see. Yeah, I mean, Switzerland's very rich, you know? It's a very tremendously wealthy country in Trump's word.
Yeah.
All right. So we discussed about public transportation, we discussed about universal health care. What else do you think is, you
Well,
know,
one thing that I think is an interesting thing to point out is that just the division that's been going up everywhere recently. Like, it's clear to say America has seen division, but that's also happening in Europe with the refugee crisis and Euroscepticism on the rise again. We're,
yes,
we're now seeing this, now seeing figures like Le Pen and Salvini challenging the status quo.
yes. There seems to be a right wing, like it's not neo-Nazi, but almost neo-fascist, right?
Neo
Like
neo neo nationalism.
yeah,
Probably.
neo-national, yeah, it's like a neo-nationalism that has taken basically over the world, actually, if you think about it, because it's not just in countries where it's democratic that this is happening, but also in countries such as Russia, such as China, such as
India,
Japan, such as
Egypt.
India. Yeah, they've all become very hyper nationalistic, and and this and this movement is, and even in Canada, I know that this kind of national pride is been taking over slowly, and I think this is very dangerous. It's a very dangerous trend, and it can cause massive amounts of conflicts. What do you think?
Oh yeah. Now I am obviously it's like and it's interesting with Canada because in Quebec, which is thought to be one of the most left-wing nations, their current government is now a right-wing populist Quebec nationalist government. And this
Hmm.
is something you'd never expect in Canada, but it's happening. We have the Wexit movement in Canada too, which is like this Western separatism that's a whole nother issue altogether. And even liberal countries like Sweden, we now have the Swedish Democrats coming
Hmm.
into second place, even first place before the coronavirus. And
Yeah.
again, this coronavirus, I've said this before, this is definitely going to add like gasoline to that fire because I keep hearing people, oh no, but the polling numbers for the status quo parties are up. That's just because rally behind the flag effect. Once that's gone, all these nationalists are going to be the ones pointing out. Like, I can imagine Salvini in Italy saying, oh, but if you look at the government, they wanted closer relations to China, and this is how this happened. I will not be that leader. And you
Hmm.
can just, I can imagine, like, again, this is like opposition to the PLC. That's obviously, I think, is a very good thing. But I also think, though, that an unfortunate side effect will be that I think this sort of xenophobic nature will occur. That's definitely going to be a bad effect.
Yeah. Yeah. I think uh we sort of talked about this in not me and you, but your
Yeah.
guests have talked about this in the very first episode of the Thorn and Roses, immigration and border control. Um, and my position is, um, we need to have border control. We need to have, definite borders, but we do need to make sure that the people that are seeking refuge are being taken care of, and we not just ignore the people that are trying to come into our great nation. And the thing is, um, people come to the United States because they still think that the United States is powerful, is has great economic value, and
The
is
land
like
of
top notch.
opportunity
Yeah, the
is
land of
what
opportunity. Like it will actually be scary if there comes a day when no one wants to come to the United States. Like when that day comes, the United States will basically really be unattractive. You know, it's quite ironic in a sense that if what the alt-right conservative like dreamland where no immigrants ever comes to the United States actually is achieved, that's the day when you know that the United States have fallen from grace.
They probably will be achieved on accident.
Can you explain that on accident?
Well, you see, we accidentally made the nation so bad that no one wants to move here.
Oh my God. You really think so?
I don't think that's where we're going down right now because if you look at
Mm-hmm.
immigration statistics, they're just going up and up and up. Like we're still getting like over 1 million new people coming in every year. So
Mm-hmm.
those are not going anywhere. So that's not I don't see in the near future that going down for now. That
Mm-hmm.
could happen given down the line, but like I'm actually for less so immigration, but I don't want to make the nation so bad no one wants to move here. That that's obviously something no one wants.
Yes. Yeah, that's something that no one will want is to make our nation so bad that like no immigrants like wants to ever move here. But you know, it's actually really interesting to see how um, these hyper nationalistic movement rises and across like all types of nations, you know. And I feel like that's a side effect of globalization and automation. Like
Yeah.
what Yang said in his book, The War on Normal People. It's not that globalization doesn't create wealth, it's that most of the wealth that are being created by globalization goes to like the top, the very, very top 0.0001%. And the people at the bottom, the vast majority of people don't feel like they've gained anything. Therefore, they view this globalization process as the enemy when it's really crony capitalism and it's not and it's not like the free market's fault, you know.
Also, I think another thing that's causing this is like I think realistically a lot, especially in Western Europe, I think we're becoming a little too socially liberal on a lot of stances. Like I support gay marriage. If you want to get married, if you're gay, that's good. But some of what they do in these gay pride parades where they wear barely nothing and act like animals, that's obviously A, not helping your movement, and B, is making a lot of people reveal nations like Poland, which declare themselves LGBT free zones now. This is again,
Yeah, yeah, I definitely agree with that. I'm not here to judge what you cannot or you can't what you can do or you can't do, what the LGBTQ movement is. But I really do think that, you know, leaning on social issues, I'm not saying social issues not important, but too oftentimes social issues are being propped up so that the not the capitalist class, but the crony capitalists on the top can ignore the actual economic suffering of people because they give us those social labels to divide us, and then they rob all the people meanwhile of like the money like they have, you know.
and it's a good way to divide populace because right now, because a lot of right wing populists and left wing populists are going to agree on economics, but these social issues are constantly dividing the nation, the movement.
Yes, I agree. To that, I actually want to say that we should lean on more universal healthcare, universal basic income, and just more universal services to get both the right-wing populists and the left-wing populists on board. And we take back our economic power first because that's the most important part. If we get our economic power back, we can have more political say in our system, and then we argue over the social issue, whether or not it's reparation, which I support, or whether or not it's gay rights, or whether or not it's abortion. We talk about that later, but let's get the economic power back first. What do you
Yeah,
think?
I think that's a pretty good idea. And another idea I've been thinking, if we ever formed a third party, we make it economically populist and direct democracy as the two unifying factors, and everything else would be like this big tent party where and it will help when trying to get the house because we're all going to need to get both conservative and liberal areas. So why not? Well, if we need to get a liberal in the house, we could get like David Kim or anyone else John has interviewed. And then if we want to get like a right wing populist into the house, if we need someone from like Mississippi or Tennessee, we could get a more conservative like myself. Or
Hmm. Yes, I do see what you mean. Definitely. Those I'm not saying that conservatives who value traditional family values are wrong, even though I have huge disagreement with them on social issues. But we are actually very closely aligned in economic issues. Like, we both want to drain the swamp in Washington, D.C. In fact, that's what Trump ran his campaign on. He said he's going to drain the swamp, he's going to get rid of the corruption. But I don't think he's done a good job on that.
yeah, I mean Kushner and all his establishment buddies just turned that into a bunch of snake oil,
Yeah,
realistically.
yeah, I know. And like if I was Trump and he has like the right-wing populist supports him, if I was him, I'll be pushing for universal basic income like that, and people will just flock to him this November if he was smart. But no, he himself is an establishment. His great uncle worked in the federal government before, I think, and he himself is a billionaire with billionaire friends who's all connected to Epstein, the Clintons. They golf together, and people say that he's anti-establishment, but he's not. He is. You can't get more establishment than Donald Trump. He is a billionaire president, so he's obviously not going to be the one who's going to drain the swamp and give the economic power back to the people. We need to elect candidates who understand the economic suffering of everyone who's struggling to make ends meet, struggling to pay off debt, struggling to pay rent, and push for universal health care and push for universal basic income. And we can argue about the social issue later.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's just my take, and I'm glad that we come to a mutual agreement in this segment.
yeah, yeah, like, and obviously finding people on the economically popular side on your more left-wing views is a lot easier than me because I imagine it will actually become more likely to find people who believe stuff more of what I believe after Trump is gone and this power vacuum re-begins again because we all know this.
Mm,
And this is actually a pretty good opportunity because this is one of the first few times in history where both the Democrats and the Republicans, after Trump leaves, they will both be having their swords turned at each other and not at they have them turned on themselves, not at each other.
yeah.
And that's the type of chaos that could allow for more democracy reform. And
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Right now, I'm starting to see the trend that there is a divide, like a civil war going on in both the Republican and the Democratic Party. Like in the Republican Party, you have really socially conservative, the socialist, not the socialist, the socially conservative faction, and the very crony capitalist faction.
Yeah.
And on the Democrat side, you have the same thing. You have the really left-wing, socially liberal faction, and you have the progressive, and then you have the really crony capitalist virtual signaling, you know, like Democrats. And I think that amidst the chaos that the COVID-19 has brought upon the United States, I think you're definitely right. Like people, after people realize what they're in, how they're screwed, like the eviction crisis that's about to come, um, we will see more liberal stances, more progressive economic more politicians that are willing to embrace progressive economic policies come out of this election cycle. I really do agree with that.
I and I don't know if you heard about this, but like one of the big social conservative leaders, Ann Coulter, actually endorsed Mitch McConnell's opponent
Hmm.
because, see, obviously, I don't think she did it for any ideological reason. I just think they just want McConnell out because he's just this guy who's been there for like 40 years almost, like,
Yeah,
and he's just like a lot of people think he's holding the party back.
he is though. Like, I actually
Yeah,
think that he is holding the Republican Party back. Like, if he, I mean, if he was like I have huge disagreement with Marco Rubio, but if he was as charming as Marco Rubio, the Republican Party would have no problem keeping him there. But I think he is like a menace on our democracy, and I'm I'm still salty that Amy McGrath won the Democratic nominee. It should have been Mike Brohier, in my opinion, but
yeah,
we can only hope that Amy McGrath adopts some of the universal health care and universal basic income
yeah.
policies from both Charles Booker and Mike Burhier. And with those two policies, she can definitely beat, Mitch McConnell, because if she adopts Mike and Charles policies, she will have support from all major cities in,
And she'd have this also conservative edge
yeah,
because
she'll
she
have,
can
oh, sorry.
attack Mitch McConnell for being like this on stuff like immigration, which I think could appeal to Kentuckians. Oh, whatever you call them.
Yeah, yeah, Kentuckians. I would call them Kentuckians.
Mm.
Yeah, exactly. If like Amy McGrath is smart, I would advise her team. I mean, if Amy McGrath team, if you're listening, team up with Mike Burhier and Charles Booker. That way, you get all the support from the major cities, and you get the rural support. And with that, you can definitely defeat Mitch McConnell.
Yeah, and then I don't know, maybe we'll get lucky, and when picking the new leader, we get Josh Hawley or someone like that.
Oh my God, yeah, that would. I can only dream.
Yeah. Oh, even Romney is possible.
Yeah, I actually think that more, more Mitt Romney type of Republicans will emerge after November.
Yeah. Like, I think the big thing the Republicans Party really need to do to become the party of the people again is first they have to get rid of the Rockefeller faction, and then they really
Yes,
have to embrace conservatism and populism. That's the
yes, yeah. It's sad that right now, like progressive economic policies such as universal health care and universal basic income is seen as left wing and communist or socialist by the right wing people when it's really not. like literally helping people to thrive and achieve their dreams, achieve their American dreams is a very traditional American value. And I think that the Conservative Party should really double down on that, you know?
And I think that, yeah, like, I think we should unify populism until we get our main goals done, and then we can go to, like, attacking people based on their personality and their,
Yeah,
yeah. Once we
yeah,
get all
yeah,
that populism done, then,
yeah, exactly. Like, let's have more say in the government first. Like, let's not worry about like paying rent or like getting medical debt or you know things like that first. Like, once we have like room to like breathing room to survive and to really think about stuff, we can actually then figure out the disagreement on these social issues because because at that time we'll have like much cooler heads and calmer, you know, we can actually see each other eye to eye. Because right now, the economic issue is making everyone despise each other because we have the impression that we're like the victim group and everyone else is doing better than us. But in reality, we're all equally suffering, you know?
yeah.
So so I definitely agree with what you said there.
So again, with the succession, I actually think that the person who will succeed McConnell is that senator from South Dakota. He's like the number two guy. It's complicated, but
I see. Yeah. I would actually look forward to who is going to be the face of the Republican Party after Trump, because I don't think after this election cycle he's going to be. I think his approval rating will drop significantly. Like even I don't know if he will even win president, but even if he does win president, I think his legacy will be tarnished, and the new face Republican Party will most likely embrace some type of progressive economic policy.
well, right now in Virginia, we have the Republican primary for the Senate election has Daniel Gade, who he is not necessarily the most progressive, but he has supported things like cutting back power of big pharma and government, being a more he takes a more libertarian approach and a progressive approach, but still he does fight cronyism and he's also anti-war and he's a veteran. So I thing is, I think he's actually pretty good. But the main
Mhm.
issue with him is that Virginians aren't going to vote for him simply because Republican Trump affiliation, and then Nova's just going to be establishment no matter what. But
Yeah,
that's a
and that.
that's a that's something I don't like because back in like just 10 years ago, the state was like swing state. The state actually mattered. But now, since everyone decided to vote blue, it's now suddenly this state can no longer get the same importance that it used to have.
Mhm.
And that's why I actually kind of joined the Virginia Project, which is to help Republicans get elected to Virginia. I want to make this place at least a swing state again, so it doesn't
I
like.
see. Yeah, I actually think that we have. It's so disheartening to say this, but both the Democrats and the Republicans do gerrymandering. And
Yeah.
right now, they've done it in a such large scale that certain states or like certain districts remain blue or red despite what the people of that city wants. You know, you can be
Yeah.
like just a block like away from each other and have the identical policies, but because of gerrymandering, you're either going to be forced, your district's going to be forced to vote red or forced to vote blue, and that has to stop. Gerrymandering needs to be ended in our election cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Just,
with that being said, I want to talk about something that's fun now. Well, it's not fun,
no.
but it's a very conspiracy theory based. So
Ah.
So recently, I've heard some from some right-wing conspiracy theories that um, that us progressives, the liberals, the libtards, are trying to kill off all the white population. Have you heard about that theory before?
Oh, you mean the theory of white genocide? Yeah,
Yes.
it's kind of yeah. Every time you bring that up, I'm just like, oh yeah, I used to believe that a long time
You
ago.
used to believe that? Oh my
It was
God.
like, yeah, it was like when I was because I've said this before. I used to be a lot more right wing than I am now,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. When I first moved here, I was actually thinking because the politicians were acting like Hungarian politicians. I was thinking, yeah, that could actually be true. Of course, now, of course, I kind of realize, wait a second, that's not white genocide. They don't like anyone.
Yeah, exactly. They hate everyone equally. They're screwing
Yeah,
everyone equally.
they're not racist. They're just humanists, anti-humanists.
Yes. Oh my God. That's so true. They're anti-humanists. They screw away everyone. They're like trying to take power away from like everyone, so they become just constantly in economic and financial ruins, and that's how they prop up the system that's going. And right now, I'm actually going to criticize this happens on both sides. This immigration crisis was created so that the conservatives can say to their fan base, their supporters, "Oh, look, we're being invaded by those filthy immigrants." Well, the progressives and the Democrats can turn to their voter base and say, "Oh, look, we're trying to protect the immigrants' rights. We're trying to protect these refugees from the oppression of the Republicans." But neither party like wants to solve the issue. They want to keep the status quo so they can keep manufacturing those stories to feed into their voter base, and that's
And,
what's the
and,
most crazy part.
and let's be realistic. Democrats still want to send ICE agents into schools to capture children, and Republicans will still always be weak on immigration, no matter who.
Yeah,
It's just
that's because they That's because they're pandering to their voters. In reality, they want to keep up the status quo so they can have this constant fear to control their voters.
yeah. But
And
also, they still want to use cheap labor because
yeah, and that cheap
yeah,
labor. Yeah, I actually really liked Andrea Ocasio-Cortez's Green New Deal, but some of her deals, in my personal opinion, when I was reading through it, requires immigrants to come here and work to build up, essentially our green new economy. But then what happens after the immigrants builds up the economy? What happens then? Are they just
and
out of
also
jobs?
if you're taking
Or
all those if you take enough people out of a region, that
Mhm.
region's gonna start suffering more.
Yeah,
That's the same
yeah,
with the immigrant crisis in Europe. Some African leaders are actually complaining that Europe's taking in so many because they're complaining about depleting populations, even though
yeah,
realistically their populations are just fine. But
yeah. Um, I really do think that um, in the future, I think I posted this on Twitter before, but I think in the actually not so distant in the future because technology is going to explode, but when we get to space mining and like our space age begins, we need to make sure that the wealth that's being created from space operations belongs to all of humanity, and we can use that wealth that's generated from space in the future to create a sort of global universal basic income, if you know what I'm saying. Like,
uh,
like the biggest like um like arguments from the conservatives I actually heard for universal basic income is they said that it's all good if you want the universal basic income to be implemented in America, but what happens to everyone who flocks to America just to get the universal basic income? And to that, I actually say that in the future, why stop at giving just Americans universal basic income? Why not give the entire world, a global universal basic income? And that's where I see the future lies.
I would have just said only for American citizens, dumbass. Obviously,
Yeah,
that's how I would.
well, yeah, well, you have to show your ID and you have to have valid identification, of course, to get the UBI. But what I'm saying is, in the future, we can have a global UBI system that will allow impoverished nation to catch up, maybe. Like, I still haven't worked out the details, but that's something I've been thinking of lately.
Strange fact though. There was actually a time one nation implemented, almost tried to implement UBI, but the people rejected it.
Really? There's a
Yeah,
nation like that? Which one?
in Switzerland, they actually tried to implement universal basic income, but 77% of Swiss said no.
What was the reasoning?
It's Switzerland. They're very capitalist, and this was apparently seen as some anti-capitalist behavior. So,
It's not anti-capitalist though. What the universal basic income does, at least the Andrew Yang version, with the value added tax, it distributes wealth from the top um, down to the min down to the everyone else. So we actually spend when we spend money, those UBI money actually goes back up to the top. But so it's like a trickle up economy. That's what Andrew Yang had been saying for years now. And we need to realize under our current system, when the wealthy billionaires gets more and more money and suck more and more resource out of everyone else, there will be a point when everyone is so poor or like so economically distressed that we can't afford to buy the products that the rich produce. So what happens then? You need a universal basic income to make the system stable, to keep the money flowing, because it is the flow of money, the flow of currency that generates value and not the actual currency itself that
this
has
was
value.
this was also a thing that was brought up in like Canada during the depressions. In Alberta, there was
Hmm.
a social credit party, which actually temporarily did implement UBI.
Hmm.
It was interesting because UBI was at this time only considered by Christian evangelicals. You can
Oh,
imagine how.
wow.
Yeah. So yeah, kind of ironic to think about how evangelicals were actually the original pioneers of UBI. But then Canada's government was like, no, only we can give out money, and we don't want to.
Oh, how ironic how the script have flipped since then.
Yeah. And now Alberta is the one that opposes UBI while the rest of Canada.
Supports it.
Yeah.
I know history is full of ironies, and and but great ideas are still great ideas, no matter which group it comes from. As long as it's a great idea and it's a feasible one, it will be rediscovered no matter what. And I think UBI is one of those ideas that will shine through and that we desperately need in the
Yeah,
future.
I can agree with. Well, also, we're coming on to the 1 hour mark. So, do you have any
Mhm.
final statements?
I don't have any final statements, except I have a question though. Who is your next guest? Is it Bree?
Yes. And
All
then
right.
from then on, I don't know who's going to be on. I'll just beg people to join.
All right. Well, you're going to get people to join, but I just want
Yeah.
to tell everyone that the next guest, Bree, it's going to be really insightful as well. You guys are going to enjoy the episode.
Okay. Well, until then, this has been the Thorns and Roses, and until Monday, I will see you then.
All right, bye.